A small price to pay for a lovely neck. Have you ever wondered what it would be like to live during the 1800s? Well, here's one thing that might make you glad that you were born in the modern era. People used to pay a small price to have their heads chopped off. The 1800s was an age of many things, but perhaps the most notable was just how many ways there were to get your head chopped off. One of the more popular methods was the guillotine, which took its name from Dr. Joseph Guillain, the French physician who invented it. He intended it to be a more humane way to carry out executions by beheading, since it would supposedly cut off the head so cleanly that the condemned wouldn't even feel any pain. In practice, this didn't really work out. The guillotine was used across Europe and also found its way to the American South. It was so popular that at one point there were 4 companies in the United States alone that manufactured these devices. Another way to get your head chopped off was to simply pay for it. Literally, the custom was to pay the executioner based on the coarseness of the instrument that would be used to chop off your head. If you had enough money, you could pay for a nice clean cut with a well-made saw. But if you were poor, then you would get the cheapest option available, which was usually a rusty old axe or some other blunt instrument. But that wasn't the only strange way that people lost their heads in the 1800s. People would also pay to have their heads shaved bald, not because they were entering the witness protection program, but because they were about to be put to death by firing squad. Apparently, the rule was that if the person whose head was being shot off had a full head of hair, then some of those hairs would get caught in the rifle barrels and ruin the aim of the marksman. So in order to avoid any unfortunate accidents, the condemned would get a free haircut before their execution. Of course, not all of the most horrible and weirdest events of history took place in the 1800s. Here are 2 more historical horror stories from other eras to help you get some shut-eye, part 2. Now for something from the much more recent past. Did you know that from 1932 to 1934, a serial killer was stalking the streets of New York City? Well, actually, we don't know if the killer was male or female since they were never caught and their victims were both male and female. But we do know that they were responsible for killing dozens of people across New York State, many of them in Central Park. Their preferred method was to strangle their victims, often with piano wire, and then hack their bodies to pieces. The police suspected that the killer might have been part of an international anarchist movement, but they were never able to prove it, and the case remains unsolved to this day. This is why they call it the Central Park murders. Not because it was a crime spree confined to the famous park, but because that's literally in the middle of Manhattan. It's impossible to get away from. Yeah, you can go to the resource section to learn more about this case and others, or you can watch our full video series Madman of New York on CuriosityStream. CuriosityStream is an entertainment powerhouse with thousands of fascinating documentaries and non-fiction titles from the world's best filmmakers. They have new content added every month, and you can watch on all your favorite devices. Part of the fun of CuriosityStream is discovering some forgotten piece of history that you never knew about, like the Madman of New York. But that doesn't mean that they don't have more well-known historical content too. For example, I recently watched The Real Balkan Wars, a gripping documentary that covered the period of conflict between Serbia, Bulgaria and Greece in the early 1900s. It was expertly made with great visuals and tons of primary source footage. And now for the final installment of this triple feature, part 3. Now for something from a very distant past. Did you know that for hundreds of years after the Black Death ravaged Europe in the mid-1300s, people believed that the only way to prevent another plague pandemic was to kill all the rats in the world? Of course, this was easier said than done. So instead, people did the next best thing. They passed laws making it illegal to be poor. The logic was that poverty caused people to live in unsanitary conditions, which attracted rats. So if you made a law against poverty, then you could effectively make a law against rats. To that end, many European countries passed laws requiring that all able-bodied beggars and tramps be put to death. While there may have been some isolated instances where this law was actually enforced, it seems unlikely that many people were put to death for the crime of being poor. However, there is some evidence that at least a few people were killed in England during the 1600s for violating the poor laws. Thanks for watching. Hopefully you learned something new and maybe even found a fresh new way to die.